based on carbon at all. It wasn't based on greenhouse gases in any way. And there's just assumptions that are made that it coincides with greenhouse gas reduction. It does not. As Jeff Forward pointed out, Hydro-Quebec absolutely has a greenhouse gas footprint, actually in two big ways. One, reservoir emissions are enormous. And secondly, and because it's an enormous system, they're small acre by acre, but they're big when you add it all up. To our 100 square miles of Vermont reservoir, if you think of it that way. And also from the lost forest. If we're talking about sequestering forest here, we should probably think about the fact that we've wiped out 100 square miles of forest up there. So, and that continues to grow. So this is really important. I would add to that that we also
Steve, I'm just jumping in to get you to wrap up as soon as you can, please.
Okay, well, we've provided plenty of comment on this. I hope that some of the public comment on this reaches the electric sector at some point. Thank you.
No, thank you, Steve. Apologies for interrupting like that.
No problem. Thank you.
Dan Riley is up next on my screen.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Dan Riley with Efficiency Vermont. I would just want to echo my thanks. As everybody else has said, this is an important public service, and we really appreciate all the members of the commission taking the time for these. I just had a process question. Secretary Young mentioned the need to sort of inventory what we've already been doing in the state and sort of cross-reference it against these potential solutions. Here at Efficiency Vermont, we've helped remove over 12 million metric tons of CO2 over the last 20 years. That number is even higher when you add in sort of our parent company, VEIC. We see huge opportunities for Vermont in the recommendations that were presented today, and we're eager to partner with the council in a variety of sectors. But we do have questions around the public engagement process. David, as you mentioned, December is really coming up here. We're concerned that there's not enough structured time for workshopping the solutions needed to achieve these targets. And we just want to make sure that the plan builds upon the existing structures and expertise that Vermont has already invested in. Can you, and maybe this is something that Jane can touch on later, but can you advise the best way that organizations like ours can offer detailed feedback on these draft recommendations? Is there a formal process? Just thinking about, for Efficiency Vermont, whether it's flexible load management, cars, ag, a lot of different thoughts that we would have on what's presented today, and just curious about what the best way to do that would be.
I'm glad you asked that question, Dan. Let's put a pin in that question and have Jane come to it in this final section around next steps. And I think it's a really important question about next steps and how we weave in multiple voices into them. So thanks for raising it, Dan. Virginia, you're up next.
Hi. So I'm Virginia Clark. I'm from the Richmond Planning Commission. So working at the local level and also on the Energy Committee here in Richmond, trying to intersect the two. And I just wanted to bring to light a comment that Richard Cowart made in one of the earlier mitigation meetings, which I really appreciated, which is that for most of this work to happen, 1,000 decisions have to be made by individual people. So, do I buy a heat pump? Do I retrofit my house? Should I buy local food? Should I drive less? Should I get a bike? All of these questions are made at the individual level. And I would like to see that as the starting point for what is needed at every subsequent higher level to support that decision. So for instance, should I buy an electric car? Well, what's needed at the community level or the municipal level? Do we need more electric charging stations? Do we need more education about what that means? Do we need zoning that is going to support electric charging stations? So if we could analyze starting at the very beginning from what that individual decision is going to entail, what is needed at every single level, and there will be needs at every single level. Obviously, we need transmission lines, we need, more in-state generating facilities, but if you start with the decision, I think it's going to help us get to that point, because all of these things really come down to people choosing. Should I sell my farm? Should I develop my forest land? What is needed? I would like to see in your action steps, you analyze what is needed for all of these thousands of individual decisions to take place. And that's also going to be very helpful when the municipal level, those of us working at the local level, tries to plug in with your action plan. You know, what are the steps that are appropriate to our level to help support those individual decisions? So thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. Really helpful lens. Matt Coda, you're up next.
Thank you very much. My name is Matt Coda, Executive Director of the Vermont Fuel Dealer Association. We represent fuel distributors and heating service technicians throughout the state. Just want to highlight the work of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, particularly the clean heat standard. The policy, as we understand it, has been explained to us and is fuel neutral based on a carbon equivalent emissions. It's important to us and the people that I work for, the people out keeping Vermonters warm this winter and every winter, that we reward fuels and technologies that reduce total life cycle carbon equivalent emissions, that we not favor one specific fuel or technology over the other. When you consider that 1/3 of the petroleum sold in Vermont every year is distillate, this is fuel that we use to power our rural economy. It powers our milk trucks and farm tractors, skidders, feller brunchers, power generators, sugar houses, and it heats homes for about 100,000 homes in Vermont. It's about half the population will depend, like it or not, depend on distillate, heating oil and kerosene to heat their homes this winter. We see a great advantage in reducing carbon and meeting the mandates of the Global Warming Solutions Act in renewable liquid fuels. It utilizes existing storage systems, existing infrastructure, works seamlessly in existing appliances at little cost to the consumer. We just need a mechanism that counts the carbon savings and provides incentives to the marketplace to reduce carbon in our liquid fuel supply. And I look forward to working with the subcommittee and the general committee in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you being here. Last up, I have Rob. Go ahead, Rob, please.
Hi, Rob Lamert here. I'm independent. I don't really work with anybody, but I could echo what Matt Coda said, and I just wanted to add a couple of things that I think might help. First, I wanted to point out that Act 153 has a clause in it that says that one of the objectives is to maximize the state's involvement in interstate and regional initiatives and programs designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build upon national, state, international partnerships, et cetera, designed to mitigate climate change. And I did want to indicate that NYSERDA, in partnership with Cornell University, Rochester Institute of Technology, and the SUNY system, has just been awarded a very significant grant to develop, actually to incubate businesses that are based on removal of carbon from the atmosphere. So carbon is a problem. Carbon is a raw material. We can essentially put carbon back and store it indefinitely in products. I'd highly recommend that we take a very close look at this. They've committed $10 million, which for New York is not a whole lot of money, but it'll get some things going. And there are some major improvements in the built world that we can make, for example, replacing fossil fuels and asphalt. And I can't say highly enough how wonderful what I saw today was. It's very, very encouraging, but I do think there are some gaps. And you know, I'd be happy to point you in the direction of things that I've been able to uncover having to do with the use of carbon and its value in meeting our climate goals.
Thanks. Excellent. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate you saying that. Okay, and I hope someone takes him up on his offer. Okay, so thanks everyone who raised your hand. If you're a member of the public or observing, you've had a hard time finding your Zoom hand raise function, but you do want to make a comment, let me just quickly pause. If someone's trying out there to make a comment, but they can't find the foolish hand raise function, which does happen, we know. So I'll just pause. If you need to unmute yourself and just shout out and say, yes, I'm trying to make a comment, now's the moment. Okay, great. And I'm just looking, we have people on the phone. I don't actually see anybody just on the phone right now. Okay, Great. Well, thanks everyone for those comments and for joining us today. We do have one more piece of business before we finish up, and I appreciate everybody hanging in there till 1 if we can do that. And that is, we do need to talk about next steps. And Jane has prepared a few slides on this to guide us, and I want to make sure Jane was able to change locations and is with us to do that, because I know that
I did.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Jane, why don't you walk us through the next steps pieces you wanted to highlight to the council members, and if also you heard some of that public comment about how people plug into this going forward as well.
Okay, thanks everybody. And thanks for sticking with us for a few more minutes. At the steering committee meeting about a week or so ago now, we were fortunate, more than a week or so ago now, 2 weeks ago, we were fortunate enough to hear from our contracted consultants, Climate Access and RISE, who put forward their public engagement plan. Unfortunately, the timing, as well as all the way sequencing the work has come out, they didn't come to a full council meeting, but they were able to join us with the steering committee at the same time that all of the co-chairs from the 5 subcommittees joined us for the regularly scheduled meeting to preview the plan through a presentation. That plan was now submitted to the agency staff for some initial feedback last week. They're finalizing, incorporating those edits, and anticipate sharing with us a PDF of that plan by this Wednesday. Accompanying that plan will be a survey to guide all of you as council members, subcommittee members, to target your feedback and comments in a somewhat quick turnaround, but are anticipating sharing it on Wednesday and giving you all up to a week perhaps to complete the survey and finalize that plan. Recognizing that as we're doing that and making sure it's clear and concise on words on paper, that we're also moving forward into implementation of it regardless and consecutively as that's ongoing. And so I just want to highlight here, especially mindful of the public's comments just now, as well as others, council members and subcommittee members who may not be familiar with the next phase of rollout, some of the highlights for all of you to be engaged and thinking about. So the month of August and into September, with respect to the work of our consultants, they're really focused on finalizing the plan and building the collateral that will be the toolkit for all of us to use and specifically for them to use as they roll out with the larger statewide and regional public engagement events that we have planned for this September. In addition to those events, which we're really thinking of now as the nucleus, the center for engagement to be built around, we're also focusing engagement right now around ensuring that we have targeted stakeholder feedback in order to inform and further refine the pathways and strategies that you all just saw in order to guide us into the action development and really to get at the meat of what all of you have spoken to, what you want to do next, the how, the action, the financing, and all of that to prioritize which strategies we're going to do that with. So much of that for cross-sector, as I alluded to earlier, is focused in and around coordinated effort around the sectors with the comprehensive energy plan. So transportation, buildings and thermal, and electricity all have stakeholder engagement plans for the month of August that are just now being scheduled, and invitations are going out to the targeted stakeholders that we want there to help inform those recommendations. But those events will also be open to the public so that the public can also be there as well. And then, as I suggested earlier, ag and ecosystems and rural resilience will also be thinking about what stakeholder events they would like to have. And I'll just put a pin that CBI is actually the organization that David works with, will be supporting those stakeholder events in an effort for us to get real-time feedback to inform us so that we're getting public summaries of what we hear and learn at those events back to the subcommittee members as quickly as possible to inform their strategy and pathway development. So that will be ongoing in the month of August, and I expect with ag and ecosystems and rural resilience into September. Climate Access and RISE will step in September, and we are planning to host four, I should say, in-person public engagement events built around this material that you all just presented today, with an orientation at the beginning really around why Vermonters should care and how Vermonters are learning, seeing the effects of climate change and what they think we should be thinking about. So that will really be teed up for 4 in-person events in September, as well as 3 online events in an effort to try to get as much representation at those as possible. And then in October, we will hear that summary of stakeholder engagement, as well as the statewide events presented to the full council to inform the public inform the climate action plan development, which will be really crunch time at that point for drafting. I should say that in addition to those events led by Climate Access and RISE, as well as the targeted stakeholder event, there will also be some opportunity for us to focus and use that collateral being created by Climate Access and RISE to target additive events that you all have already signed up for, already are hosting, places where we can create added value in delivering our message and trying to bring Vermonters in. And we'll be refining what that really looks like in the public engagement plan, about the tools that would be necessary for council members, subcommittee members, perhaps, as well as A&R staff and others to support those meetings. So targeted feedback forms, the really focused facilitation guide that helps us implement the collateral. This winter, as we launch the initial plan, it'll just be a continued motion of engagement. We'll put that plan forward. We'll have a number of events still. We'll be supporting that through partner support as well, which we have money in our contract with Climate Access and RISE to do. And we'll be thinking about how we use a deliberation platform that Climate Access and RISE have had success using in the past to get further information from the public via the online or at these in-person events to inform, further inform the climate action plan. Their contract takes us all the way through February and March, and there'll be more feedback to the council to consider and roll into, as well as tools that we can think about how we use in the ongoing commitment to implementation and working with the public as the plan unfolds. And so that's really the nexus of our public engagement plan. And I encourage everybody to review the draft as it comes out this week with a specific focus on how you all can be involved. It'll be posted online as well as the survey. And there'll be an email orienting you all to it from me later this week. So I'm going to keep moving, mindful of time, and recognize that I am not going to go through this in excruciating detail right now, but you all are familiar with the milestones that I've been trying to keep up and frame out what our climate council meetings are going to look like in the coming months to get us to adoption of the climate action plan by December 1st. I've continued to refine this based on my best understanding of when we're going to have what from technical consultants that are currently working on significant components of the work for us, as well as our commitment to the implementation and operationalizing of the guiding principles and equity components, thinking about how I'm working with Just Transitions to bring on support for that work, when that would happen in the process with all of you, and then thinking forward the steps and critical components of when subcommittees come back and when things will be refined for finalization and inclusion in the climate action plan. I will say that we're thinking about this with Marion's help as well, about all the key touch points with all of you around the different components of the climate action plan, so that by the time you get a draft climate action plan come later this fall, many of those components will all be familiar with you already. We will have discussed it as a council at some point or another. And so you won't be seeing each thing for the first time and having a very short time to deliberate. Hopefully we will have done a good job along the way. What these milestones will also show you is that, I think you've heard me speak to this, but a recognition that after the August meeting, there's just really no way to move into the fall with the council meeting only once a month. So you'll see, I think all of you have now calendar invites from me that set us up on a bi-weekly meeting schedule for starting in September. I've suggested that one of those meetings will be in person as a council, and we'll be thinking really strategically about what those in-person meetings look like to make the most of our time together, recognizing that can often be a more effective platform for significant conversation and discussion. So stay tuned as we think about that. But what I wanted to tee up for Secretary Young to kick us off for the final component of this meeting today is a recognition that the council needs to adopt a new schedule in order for us to move forward with posting everything on the library's website and have a formal acknowledgement adoption of a new meeting schedule. So what that looks like, and for you all, that's just an appreciation that also means a new meeting schedule for the steering committee. So I'll just leave that up for your knowledge, acknowledgement. But for you all, the Climate Council schedule, starting on September 13th, will meet bi-weekly rather than monthly. And then that will also lead us to the need to have a special meeting on November 29th because December 1st is actually not a Monday. And so I was trying to keep us in line with meeting on Mondays, recognizing everybody's schedule. So November 22nd would be the last regularly scheduled meeting. And then I'm proposing a special meeting on November 29th, where we would adopt the climate action plan 2 days ahead of schedule on a full belly of turkey or whatever else you eat for Thanksgiving. And then I also asked the question that, do we also want a meeting on December 1st? And that's for you all to discuss or consider, or we can always take that up later as we're moving into the schedule, but that would be a Wednesday. So I'll leave this up and I can go back to anything if you have any questions and just tee it back up for David and Secretary Young to close us out.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, so there's a specific moment here where we have to say, yep, I think this is our schedule going forward, and we agree to it. So that's an action that you need to do as a council. And then obviously if folks have questions about the timeline, how public engagement's going to work, if you have other concerns about sort of how the different pieces are going to fit together, we have a few minutes right now to talk about that. So let's start with the questions and concerns, and then we'll do the formality of agreeing to our new schedule. I think reactions to what Jane said about the public engagement piece, about the overall timeline of meetings, and how the work's actually going to happen in the fall. Any questions or concerns, Secretary Young?
I think I saw a note from Abby real quick there. Whoops, I'm still muted. Never mind. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm looking at the chat. Yes.
I found my hand, by the way.
Yes.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I think Abby had a concern if she wants. I think I saw it in the notes about just timing and travel time if folks do plan to be there in person. So we should take that into account. Thank you, Abby.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. Catherine?
I noticed a potential conflict in the schedule that I wanted to address, which is that you're expecting actions from the Ag and Ecosystems and Rural Resilience committees at the September 27th meeting, but the public engagement will still be ongoing through September. So how are we balancing that timing of this co-creation concept with having to have our actions for September 27th? And then I'll add a third or fourth or 20th to Abby's comment about the travel. By doubling our meetings and adding in person, you're essentially tripling our meeting time for steering committee meetings. And so we need to be really thoughtful about that and decide if the in-person is 100% necessary or not.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Let's actually deal with those comments real quick. So on the travel time and the additional meetings, absolutely, there's going to be more time that we're asking of the Climate Council in the fall than we had envisioned as a monthly meeting. So absolutely. The use of in-person, I think, has to be incredibly strategic. And I think we've all become quite thankful for the fact that we're not spending a lot of time in cars traveling around to meetings. So Catherine, I think I definitely want to work with folks who feel strongly about this to really say, this would be an incredibly good strategic moment to be in person, to work through some tough stuff, and the rest we can do online. On the piece about the timing of September 22nd and not having public engagement first, I wonder, Jane, if you want to speak to that and sort of the thinking of how we're going to iterate on these items as additional information comes in from technical reports and from public engagement. But Jane, did you have a thinking about that I'm not aware of?
I think you just spoke to it well. We will have the intent is to have the stakeholder engagement completed by mid-September, and that will be funneled back to subcommittees in real time. There's also a recognition that through co-creation, there's been public engagement up until this point. We're not starting it now. We've been doing it all along. So a recognition that it's iterative. There will still be time to adopt and revise based on what we learn from the broader level engagement that we do in September. But just a recognition of the timeline that we're on and being able to meet it in the nature that it is given to us.
Yeah. Are there other or similar concerns that folks want to bring up before we finish up today in thinking about our next steps?
Can I just in response to in-person and just for food for thought for everybody, I think David and I have discussed this at length and for you all to consider, but it would be ideal if we chose to have in-person at strategic times, and that was the mission of that, or we chose to stay in Zoom and do them online. But we are struggling with the idea of how to do it efficiently and effectively with some people coming and some people staying in Zoom. So I just put a comment out there that I am happy to stay in Zoom. It was just a suggestion that for some of the harder conversations that the value of being together might be really beneficial to make us get through it. But I am happy to yield to the council's decision on any of that.
Yeah. And as Sue and others put in the chat, this is evolving from a pandemic standpoint as well. So, we want to be sensitive to that. Abby?
Just to follow up on what Jane said too, I would just say I have been a part of processes where my geographical location has meant that I have been one of the handful of people Zooming in. And I would just say that the hybrid model in terms of participation and feeling represented within a process and things like that is not overly effective, or I haven't found it to be so. So whatever we decide, I think we want to go to your point earlier, that if we're going to be in person, we need to be in person, and it needs to be strategic and thoughtful. And if we're not going to be in person, then it needs to be that we are all not in person. I just think it sets up a really difficult dynamic otherwise.
Thanks, Abby. Second that. Yeah. Leslie Ann, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, David. I just wanted to echo a lot of the other comments that have been made, especially for folks who have a 2-hour commute in each direction to get to an in-person meeting. And there's the other piece there for those who have existing commitments at that particular time. For example, myself, I teach at that time, so I'd be effectively sort of missing a lot of teaching if I were to try and be in person. So I think maybe a little bit more offline discussion to find something that works for us as a group would be much appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks. Super helpful. Okay, so we have completely run over time today, although that was understandable considering the amount of information we wanted to share with each other. We do need to do this formal willingness to say, yep, our new meeting schedule will be every other week starting September 13th, I think, unless I'm saying the wrong date, Jane. we're not saying right now, like absolutely in person or not in person. That's an open question. And I think it's been really helpful to have all the feedback on that. But what we do need to do as a council from a public notice standpoint is say, yep, our new meeting schedule as of September 13th will be every other week until we get to our December 1st deadline at least. So let me just quick test with all of us. Is there any concerns about that? Richard?
I was just to move it along, I would speak up in support of the recognition that we're going to need more meetings in the fall. Just reality.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah. Does anybody have a concern with doing that, or can we agree that that's our new meeting schedule? Lauren? Wait, Lauren, I think you're on mute. Wait.
Oh, am I still on mute?
No, you're good now.
Okay. I'm hoping that we can agree that we should be moving this to bi-weekly meetings, but I do just want to flag that it sounds like based on Leslie Ann's comment and a handful of others that we shouldn't necessarily agree to Mondays right now, that we should maybe take it offline and figure out what day and or time might work best. I see Jane shaking her head, but I do just want to elevate that Leslie Ann said she'd be working. So making sure we're making it available as needed for council members.
Yeah, after the regularly scheduled time, though. I don't think we want to open it to switching days, but that's fine.
But I do want to, just to clear up sort of factually, because Lauren, I take your point, just Leslie Ann, were you making a point that a normal meeting time is a conflict, or is that on the edges of that, which would involve driving, was a conflict?
Well, it's both actually, because every semester, everybody's teaching schedule changes.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so I was fortunate last semester to actually be teaching at night. So that wasn't a problem, but now I'm teaching in the middle of the day. So I'm just flagging that if we want to have participation of all of our council members, and I know other folks who may have other commitments who have not raised those, maybe sort of like saying, oh yeah. So I just wanted to just kind of flag that.
Thanks. So why don't we do a reality check over offline about who are we going to lose if we do that, and see if we can make some sensible adjustments based on that. Okay. Given that, are there any concerns about changing in this meeting schedule to every other week starting September 13th, knowing that Jane and I will do a piece of work around really confirming times and try to minimize conflicts for folks? Is there any concerns about doing that? Secretary Young?
I have no concerns with the biweekly. I just want to add, I think there were a couple other meetings in there in addition that we would consider special meetings. And if we can come to some agreement around every date and get those posted, it would be great. So just to satisfy our requirements to the public and to the public meeting requirements. So thank you, everybody, for your input. And I'm sure we'll figure this out.
Excellent. And Secretary Young, I think we can do it right now in terms of, unless there's objection, I would say we should post every other week starting September 13th with those two special dates, the November 29th and December 1st. And we know we may need to adjust meeting times based on this feedback we're getting right now about potential conflicts. But I just want to test if anybody would shout out and say, nope, I can't live with that, and posting that up as our new approach, just so we can go ahead and do it. Okay, so it looks like we can all live with go ahead and posting that as our new approach, knowing that Jane and I have a piece of work to do around confirming times and the like. Okay, great. Whew. I think we need to stop. And so, Secretary Young, is there anything else you'd like to say before we adjourn?
Other than just a big thank you for everyone's input, patience, the public's really constructive feedback, and it sounds like we're headed on a really robust journey ahead with public engagement, which I think is going to be very informative and exciting. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Big effort here today. Take care.